Welcome to Law and Crime Report, everybody. I'm Jesse Weber, and thanks for joining us. We start in Hartford, Connecticut, I should say, because there is a new and ominous turn in a case that we have been following here very closely on the network. Investigators are searching a property belonging to Fotis Dulos. He's the deceased man who is accused of killing his estranged wife, Jennifer Farber Dulos, who's been missing since May 2019. Law and Crime's Rachel Stockman is reporting from the scene. Take a look.
We are outside a home in Farmington, Connecticut, where state police have been here all day searching this home. You can see one of the vehicles owned by state police leaving right now. They've been out here all day searching for clues in relation to the disappearance of mom Jennifer Dulos. You'll remember this case. She was the mom of 5 children who disappeared after dropping her children off in New Canaan, Connecticut. A little bit later, police became suspicious and then arrested her husband, Fotis Dulos, and his then-girlfriend, Michelle Triconis. Fotis Dulos later committed suicide, and they've been trying to locate the body of Jennifer Dulos ever since. Now, in terms of what's been going on all day here, I can tell you we've had a drone up over this house, and this house used to be owned by Fotis Dulos' company, and we're hearing that it is in some kind of real estate transaction, and that transaction may be closing soon. So it seems that state police wanted to come back out here to see if they could find any more clues before that real estate transaction went through. We've seen police come and go, walk the perimeter, and we've even seen them dig in a couple of sites in the backyard here. I do not believe they found anything, but we're continuing to monitor this situation very closely, and if we get any new developments, we will let you know.
So what exactly is going on here? All right, let's bring in my guest, law and crime legal analyst Imran Ansari and trial attorney Catherine Smith. I'm happy to have you both here. Imran, I'll start with you. You know, the investigators say that they're following up on old leads. So again, there seems to be a timing issue here. They want to see what they can find before this real estate transaction goes through. But I feel like there's something else going on. Why go back now? What are they looking for?
Sure, Jesse. Well, law enforcement really wants to go in there and get in there before that real estate transaction is complete, because they may lose standing and the ability to really access the property without going through a lot of jumping through a lot of legal hoops to get back in on that property. So we know that they're saying that they are following up on old leads. This is a case which is not going away, even though that Mr. Dulos has committed suicide. We know that Triconis is still facing those conspiracy charges. So they are doing their investigation. There has been no body found in this case, and they are following up on this lead before that real estate goes into someone else's hands.
And we're learning as we're going through this program that they are going back in, digging with an excavator. A sanitation pump truck might be coming in as well. Now, Katie, does that give you the idea that are they looking for the body? And if that's the case, if they are to find the remains, if they are to put a conclusion of finding the body of this missing woman, where does the case go then once they have a body?
Well, you're right, Jesse, because obviously Mr. Dulos is deceased, and there's some question about how you would pursue any leads that were leading directly to him, right? But you forget, if there's evidence there on the body, it could also point to other people, and we know that his girlfriend was also arrested. So obviously, there are many reasons to want to find the body and pursuing other evidence, in addition to giving closure to the family. So, and to play the devil's advocate, even if there is a real estate transaction, you still could get evidence, even if it transfers to different hands. So I think there's something more going on. I feel like there must be something more in addition to these old leads that they're chasing down.
Imran, is Michelle Triconis talking? Did she provide them information? And that information ultimately led them back to the property? Because we'll get into her case in a second and all the charges she's facing, but is that a possibility with this change in development?
Jesse, that is a possibility. She may be cooperating with law enforcement now and the prosecutors who are prosecuting for that conspiracy charge. We don't have Mr. Dulos in the picture anymore. His case died with him. So now the spotlight is really on her. She is the surviving defendant, if you will. So I would be surprised if she and her attorneys are talking to law enforcement, providing information because really there's no one else to point the finger to now. The spotlight's on her. When that case, if it does go to trial, she'll be sitting in that chair. And there is a possibility that she may be looking to cut a deal with prosecutors right now and leading them to the body, maybe one big, sort of leverage point for her in order for her to get a good plea deal.
Just to reflect for a second, to remember what this case is about, Michelle Troconis, the former girlfriend of Fotis Dulos, she faces conspiracy to commit murder, tampering with evidence, and hindering prosecution charges. I believe these are in separate counties. It's a question if they're going to consolidate the cases together. So she is facing a lot. She and another individual, Kent Mahoney, are now on the hook for what ultimately happened to this missing woman. The question is, what happens to her case? So if we go back, her attorney spoke about her not guilty plea and also her controversial interview. Take a look.
Today was just about loosening the restrictions on her house arrest. We have postponed until March 20th consideration of any other motions that will be pending or are already pending. Perhaps that will be when we discuss the change of venue, that is moving the case to the Hartford Judicial District. Other than that, it was more of a first court appearance. Michelle pled not guilty today on the most recent charges and asked for a jury. And until I've reviewed the material that were just given to me, and that's why I brought this large briefcase, I have no other comment because I don't know enough to say anything other than what I've said before. Michelle is innocent of these charges, and we plan to fight them through the courts. Thank you very much.
Can you share any reaction to the death of Fotis Dulos from Ms. Troconis?
No, I would say that that's not appropriate.
Mr. Connis, is there anything you want to?
And then he walked and he grabbed me, he gave me a piece of paper over the toilet, the paper towel, and I put it inside where I had the bag of cleaning, what I was cleaning, the house.
Okay, did you see spilled coffee?
No, I didn't see that.
Did you see a coffee cup?
No, because I didn't look inside the car.
Did the paper towel smell like coffee?
No, I didn't smell
well,
it.
But still, you're holding that coffee stinks.
But I hold the paper towel, but I didn't smell it, I didn't see the...
But even still, you didn't smell coffee?
No.
You know how coffee is when you smell it, it stinks.
Yeah.
Smell it.
Katie, let's talk about the case of Michelle Troconis. Basically, she's accused of trying to help Fotis Dulos cover this up, coming up with an alibi for him, cleaning up the pickup truck, also being present when he dumped these bags. Who knows what was in the bags? You know, there's this kind of interesting situation that we're dealing with here about her role in what happened to this missing woman. The case against her right now, how strong is it?
Well, Jesse, it's tough. Obviously, she made statements that have been tried to be used against her. I think without additional evidence, the case against her isn't terribly strong because, of course, we have the main guy who's not in the picture anymore. And the good part, I guess, from her perspective, is that she's not being charged with the actual death. And it's easy when someone is deceased to really blame it on the other guy because he's not going to be able to defend himself if he ever was intending to testify. So there are some strategic, in a crass way, benefits to that. But I really think without additional evidence, it's going to be a tough case against her.
And just to reiterate and clarify a point, when I said, you know, the bags that she was present for, the ones that were dumped by Fotis Dulos, those had Jennifer Dulos' blood and clothing in them. So again, really right there when this was happening. As we're talking about what is happening at this property, Imran. The details of what we're going to find out today, if you're an investigator, are you going to keep that pretty close? Are you going to reveal those details, or do you not want to let anyone know what they're finding or maybe what they're not finding? Because if you're sitting in the defense attorney's position, you want to know everything that's going on. And if you're the public or you're the family, you also want to know what's going on. So how much are we going to learn from investigators and this search team today? Because as they bring in these trucks, they seem to be on the cusp of finding something.
Yeah, Jesse, well, you know, we have our crack reporter, Rachel Stockman, down there, and the Law&Crime team definitely on the scoop. But, you know, how much investigators will actually inform the public or the press remains to be seen. But the defense attorneys for Ms. Troconis, they're going to have the right to access and be privy to certain discovery and material that may be found and potentially used against her in the prosecution of the case against her. So, whether they find something and we have a press announcement or they talk to the press, that remains to be seen. But at least in terms of the legal case and the defense, they would be privy at some point, maybe not today, but at some point as to what evidence or lack of evidence was received.
Well, Katie, let me ask you this final question about this. If they, if without a body, isn't it much tougher for the prosecution to win the case against Michelle Troconis? Although it seems to be all evidence is pointing to the fact that Jennifer Dulos is no longer with us. Having said that, if they find the body, that changes the whole game. Do you sense that the defense may be like, okay, maybe now we should enter in some sort of plea deal, or we should rethink this now that the government has the body?
Absolutely, Jesse. I mean, game changer when you find the body. It's always harder with a murder to prove that there's a murder when you don't have the body. At least with the body, you can show that the person is, number one, deceased, and number two, the cause of death. So sure, if Mr. Konis knows that the body is located at this property and she is in fact involved, that might push her into trying to run some sort of deal now. Absolutely. But again, just because she was disposing of some of the cleanup supplies doesn't mean she had actual knowledge of what they were or what they contained. So there's still a lot of peripheral stuff that needs to be proved. But I agree with you, Jesse. This could be really the hot time if she does do something to cut a deal.
Because, of course, the medical examiner will have an opportunity to look at whatever remains there are. And Dr. James Gill had once said, even without a body, that he believes, based on the evidence that has been presented, that Jennifer Farber-Dulos suffered some sort of injury that was non-survivable without medical intervention. And there's no evidence to suggest she went to a doctor at any point. So, Imran, we have another 30 seconds. Let me give you an opportunity to speak about, if they find the body, what the defense would do.
Yeah, I'm going to echo Catherine's point. I mean, if the body's there, it is a game changer. You now have that physical, tangible evidence, the best evidence, if you will, in terms of the decedent's body. How that could be linked, though, towards Michelle Troconis and her conspiracy charge, that would be remain to be seen. But, a body's a game changer. Absolutely.
It really is. And look, Rachel Stockman is right near there. We'll hear if anything happens. We'll update you here on Law and Crime. Let's take a break. When we come back, a lot of stories for you. And welcome back, everybody. Former Michigan Governor Rick Snyder, who's facing misdemeanor neglect charges for his handling of the Flint water crisis, is asking for his case to be thrown out. His attorney, Brian Lennon, is saying that Snyder was charged in the wrong county. Take a look.
Yesterday, I did send a letter to Solicitor General Fadwa Hammoud, pointing out a number of things, including the fact that the indictment is fatally flawed because it's charged Governor Snyder with crimes allegedly that occurred in Genesee County. These crimes, which are both false but fatally flawed because they charged it in the wrong venue. At all times during the indictment, Governor Snyder was at his office in the Romney building in downtown Lansing. So the reason we held off, we did file a discovery request, and we attached that letter to that discovery request. But the reason we didn't file the motion to dismiss is we're trying to give the government an opportunity to recognize this mistake and voluntarily dismiss the indictment against Governor Snyder.
Katie, let's start with this argument because there's a few things that Len brings up. This idea of the wrong county. Is this a good argument? Is this enough to have the case thrown out?
I mean, it's not a substantive argument, Jesse, because, I mean, eventually, if you have the wrong venue, you can switch the venue. It's not like the case gets thrown out substantively in most situations. Also, there's different measures of venue where different parties were, for example, living at the time. But usually a venue is based where the transaction and occurrences occur. Or alternatively, if there is some sort of prejudice about being in that venue, there can always be a motion to make it in a venue where it's believed that you'll have more of a fair trial. So this issue of venue is something that can be litigated within the court. It's not a silver bullet. It doesn't mean a case is over.
Does that tell you, Imran, that they're really concerned about this case, the defense? And I imagine, look, any defense attorney wants the case thrown out for their client, but I'm going to do whatever we need to do. Every procedural issue, every substantive issue, we're going to tack upon it. and we're going to make sure that Snyder never goes in front of a jury.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also a PR tactic, if you will, because he's not filing a motion yet. He's approaching prosecutors and asking them to voluntarily dismiss the case against Snyder because of this alleged venue argument or jurisdictional argument. And he's not filing a motion. So he is sort of seeking to drum up probably some press, some PR to show that the prosecutors wrongfully charged him, and it may be a procedural error or not. And he's asking them to voluntarily dismiss that indictment. Whether that works remains to be seen. I know that the prosecutors in this case have said they're not going to argue this on the merits in terms of in informal discussions or in telephone calls or meetings. And they basically invited his attorney to make their motion. But again, it's going to be interesting because I think the state could argue that although Snyder was in a different county physically, the harm was actually realized and occurred in the county that he's been charged, and therefore it's appropriate in the current county.
You know, it's not the only argument that Brian Lennon raised. There was also an issue of whether or not the teams that looked over that, you know, there was obviously a seizure of material in this case. Did they review, did they analyze material that they shouldn't have, that was protected by attorney-client privilege? And was there a proper taint team put in place? That's an interesting legal question. Here's Brian Lennon talking more about it.
It is standard practice, prosecution 101, whenever prosecutors elect to use search warrants and they have a reason to believe that in executing the search warrants, they will be uncovering attorney-client privilege and other privileged information. It's a standard practice, and it's done to protect the integrity of an investigation. And so a taint team is made up of prosecutors and investigators who are not part of the prosecution team. They go through the evidence first to separate what is attorney-client privileged or other privileged information before they let the investigators and prosecutors who are handling the case look at it. It's a fundamental practice. The Attorney General's office under Dana Nessel routinely uses this. We have reason to believe that that was not used by this prosecution team led by Solicitor General Hammoud and Prosecutor Kim Worthy. It is a fundamental thing that, if not employed as a basic level, can disrupt the integrity or challenge the integrity of the entire investigation. And I simply asked a simple question: yes or no, was a taint team used? Because that will inform the length and the types of motions that we're going to be needing to file right out of the box. It's a simple yes or no question that I'm asking the prosecution to answer, and that I asked Solicitor General Hammoud in a letter last night and have not received an answer. Happy to meet with them this afternoon, but it's a simple question that I think should be answered on the record right now.
Katie, break this down for us. What exactly is he concerned about? What exactly does he mean by this taint team? What is he concerned didn't happen that should have happened here?
It sounds like he's saying that there should be an external team involved so that they can go through materials, and if there's anything privileged, they'll weed it out before the privileged material is seen by the prosecution, and they are then tainted by viewing this privileged material. There's so many things wrong, I think, with his analysis, though. I mean, first of all, my first thing that comes to mind is too little, too late. Did they object to this initially? There should have been some motion at the outset that said, listen, we're concerned about these privileges, and we would like to have a taint team, whether it's a regular practice or not. Secondarily, there's no evidence so far, as it seems, that there was actually any privileged material discovered. So you can't be tainted unless there's actually privileged material. So, I mean, theoretically, this is a valid argument, but I just think that there's not the legs there that it needs to really make this such a huge concern that he's making it out to be.
Imran, you said something to me before, kind of stayed with me, and it came back to this. Talked about from a PR perspective, right? Assuming Lennon is right about this, you know, maybe the material was not properly reviewed, you know, maybe there wasn't a proper taint team put in place, maybe there was material that was reviewed that shouldn't have been looked at because it was guarded by the attorney-client privilege. You couple that with the prosecution filing these charges in the wrong county. Is this all an attempt to embarrass the prosecution and say they were so quick to charge my client, they don't know what they're doing, and it just shows the weakness in their case? Is that the strategy here as well?
Yeah, Jesse, I think it's pretty key that they have come out with these statements. They have not filed a formal motion, but they're talking to the press because they're getting ahead of it. Now, if they filed a motion and that motion was dismissed, well, you've lost that little PR angle there, that way to get your narrative for your client into the media. And that by doing it this way, first approaching the prosecutors, letting it be known to the public that you have this grievance as to the venue and also as to the possible issues by not employing a taint team. You're getting that narrative out there to the public, but you haven't filed formal motions yet and you're not running the risk that it's going to be denied possibly out of the bat, and then you lose that moment, that ability to really get that narrative out there. I think that the taint team, and I'm going to play devil's advocate now with Catherine, I think that not employing a taint team is a problem. If there was any indication that there would be privileged communications in whatever they were seizing pursuant to any warrants in Snyder's office, whether it be electronic or hard documents, the taint team should have been employed right off the bat. Prosecutors need to do this because if they run the risk of building a case on tainted material that they should have not had eyes on, and that causes problems down the line. It potentially opens the door for motions in limine and the ability to have certain evidence suppressed. So that's why it's very important when there's any indication that there may be material in there that's privileged, that a taint team is employed from the get-go, and that's usually internal. Prosecutors within that office will erect a proverbial wall. They will look at that material and they will parse out the possible privileged material so that the actual prosecutors handling the case do not lay their eyes on that. So if it comes out that there were material in there that they should have not seen, and that's ultimately going to be suppressed, I think that's a bigger issue than the venue.
And what we're seeing really from Lennon in these kind of procedural arguments, as we said, it's not really substantive arguments talking about what Snyder is accused of. But Katie, let's take a step back here, right? The Snyder is charged with 2 counts of willful neglect of duty. They're not felonies, misdemeanors. How serious are these charges? How concerned is Snyder of being convicted of them? What could he face if he's convicted of this?
Jesse, I'm sure he's very concerned. These are serious charges. I mean, just because something doesn't rise to the level of a felony, if you're convicted of any crime, has wide sweeping implications, including civil implications. So, for example, if he is found to have committed these crimes, he is going to face a flood of civil litigation to the extent he hasn't already. But a finding of guilt in a criminal matter is an automatic finding of guilt in a civil matter that involves the same issues, right? So, because you can't litigate essentially the same issue twice. And so that would be extremely problematic from a monetary perspective. I mean, it would prevent him, I think in most cases, from holding office again. It would have wide sweeping implications. So I think he is incredibly concerned. And that's probably why we're seeing this doubling down of the PR before we actually see the legal maneuvering. I totally agree with Imran. This is preeminently a PR move that will eventually come into the actual legal actions, the motions being filed. So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out.
And Katie, real quick, 20, 30 seconds. Is this a tough case to defend? We talked about the procedural defenses. What about substantive defenses?
You know, every case has its challenges. And I think that because of the public outcry about this, it's going to be really tough in the court of public opinion. And that's the biggest thing that he's going to have to worry about. So, yes, I think he has an uphill battle.
Well, I tell you, there are a lot of eyes on what's going to happen to former Governor Rick Snyder. But when we come back, we're going to talk about now former President Donald Trump and the pardons and clemencies he issued in the 11th hour. We'll be right back.
There's been a show on Netflix called Tiger King. Yeah. And the man who's the star of this is a former zoo owner who's serving a 22-year prison sentence He's asking you for a pardon, saying he was unfairly convicted. Your son yesterday jokingly said that he was going to advocate for it, and I was wondering if you've seen the show and if you have any thoughts on pardoning Joe Gonzalez.
Which son? It must be Don. I had a feeling it was Don. Is that what he said? I don't know. I know nothing about it. He has 22 years for what? What did he do?
He allegedly hired someone to murder an animal rights activist, but he said that he didn't do that, and he was.
Do you think he didn't do it? Are you on his side?
Well, I'm a reporter.
Are you recommending a pardon?
No, I'm not advocating anything.
As a reporter, you're not allowed to do that. You'd be criticized by these. Would you recommend a pardon?
I'm not weighing in on Tiger
I don't
King.
think you would. I don't think you would. Go ahead. You have a question? I'll take a look. Is that Joe Exotic? That's Joe Exotic.
Well, it's hard to know if he actually took a look, but what we can say is that Joe Exotic, the Tiger King, did not receive a pardon from now former President Donald Trump, but Trump did issue over 140, actually 143 pardons and commutations in the 11th hour right before he left the office of the presidency. Some people on the list that received these were rappers Lil Wayne, Kodak Black, Steve Bannon, former Detroit Mayor Kwame Kilpatrick, and neither Trump nor his family were on those list of pardons. So let's understand exactly what they're going with here. Imran, I'll start with you. What was the pattern here? How did the president, or the former president, determine who to grant a reprieve to and who not to grant a reprieve to?
Jesse, I think it really largely, in many cases, came down to the FOT rule, which was, I would deem the friend of Trump rule. And if you had somehow supported him and his campaign and his office, then it put you in a position, just like Lil Wayne, to have yourself pardoned or your sentence commuted. I think that was really the criteria here, and we really saw the floodgates of pardons just gush out in those final hours of his term. Is pretty unprecedented, in my opinion. But if you were a friend of Trump, I think he had a good chance of getting that pardon.
But is it that simple, Katie? Because, Tiger King and his representatives supported Trump. They kept petitioning him. They were saying nice things. He didn't receive one. What do you think? I mean, what is the standard here that they were going by, and why did the Tiger King not receive a pardon? He could have been out. I know his team was saying they were waiting till 12 p.m. today to see if the last minute Trump would do something. They thought they were all going to be celebrating tonight with burgers and McRibs. I read about it. That's what you were hearing. Eric Love, this private investigator who was heading up the team, he was looking forward to Joe Exotic getting out of prison. Didn't happen. So why do you think Trump and his team decided not to do it?
Yeah, I'm slightly smiling because this whole thing is so ridiculous in the sense that the FOT rule is exactly what I think prevails, and I completely agree with Imran. There doesn't seem to be, with much of what Trump has done, much logic or system. And I don't, obviously, when Trump was asked about Joe Exotic, he pretended or did not actually know who he was. So clearly he wasn't too high up in his pardon list at that point. That said, I don't understand why he pardoned half the people that he did. A lot of it just doesn't make sense from my perspective, which, again, sheds light on the fact that there's so much more that goes on behind the scenes than we know about. Business relationships, friendships, loyalties, or things that he wants to get, right? The one thing I'm surprised about, though, is that he didn't pardon himself. And I understand why he didn't in terms of the implications during his impeachment. But I really thought that was coming down the pike, and it didn't happen.
But Imran, when you pardon or commute the sentence of Lil Wayne and Kodak Black, these weapons charges, serious crimes, is the idea that you're sitting back and saying what happened to them was unfair? Because that seemed to be a very big issue presented, or at least, was theorized that around different people around President or former President Trump, where it was that if he felt that the criminal justice system treated you unfairly, that this shouldn't have happened, I can step in and correct it. But when you're dealing with these kind of charges, these weapons charges, these are serious charges. And, Lil Wayne, if convicted, he actually pled guilty. He could have faced years in federal prison, and yet will not. So your thoughts on that?
Yeah, with Lil Wayne, I know when the administration was discussing the pardon of Lil Wayne, they cited to his philanthropy and certain things that he's done for the community as reasons why that he was pardoned. But we can't forget, and I'm going back to the FOT rule, he also was vocal about his support of Donald Trump with the Black Lives Matter movement, which Trump was definitely not a supporter of. Lil Wayne also came out with some comments where he was sort of skeptical about that movement and didn't necessarily vocalize a lot of support for that. So listen, I think there's a lot of people in the justice system who have been wrong. Were they pardoned? Not necessarily. The ones who were pardoned were mainly people who were vocalizing support of Trump, somehow endeared themselves to him or members of his administration, and they benefited from that. And that's why you saw this floodgate of pardons at the eve or twilight of his office. And I don't know if there was really a lot of thought put into some of these pardons.
Katie, couldn't the same thing happen under a Biden-Harris administration? There is no rhyme or reason for who you pardon or who you try to give a reprieve to here, right? There's no standard. You can do whatever you want. Couldn't the same thing happen? And you know, people that are loyal to that administration, they might feel that they might, or if they support them now, they might feel that they might get some sort of relief.
Theoretically, but again, I have that word that we know so well, which is the quid pro quo. Usually, previous politicians try to make sure that there's no implication that that's going on. It's a bad look. It's not appropriate. It's illegal. And so, sure, while any administration could technically, almost in exchange for good behavior, give a pardon, right? They don't do that. They try not to do that. They try to have some level of logic, fairness, people that they think were really wronged by the system, or other extraneous factors that they can support when asked, why did you pardon this person? What were the factors? What did you believe in? Is it a rule? No, but there are these political norms that are not codified rules that people have tended to follow until Trump. And I think that there's a lot more FOT going on than logic.
Well, sticking with the effects of the previous administration, the 13th federal inmate has been executed under the Justice Department's resumed capital punishment guidelines back in 2019. And I'm referring to Dustin Higgs, who was convicted of kidnapping and murdering 3 women. He had maintained his innocence, said he didn't order the killings. And his lawyers ultimately tried to halt this last-minute execution to no avail. Now, Imran, I turn it to you. It's an interesting legal case, right? I mean, even the Supreme Court got involved, and the conservative majority kind of there's been articles where they're being criticized for how they let this execution ultimately go through. And they jumped through a few impediments, and they allowed this. Can you explain, if you can, how Dustin Higgs was legally permitted in the last minute to be executed?
Sure, Jesse. Well, I think that it's somewhat, again, unprecedented in the way this was pushed through by the court. And we do know that the conservative members of the court did push this through, did vote in favor in terms of and decide that he was to be put to death. And you heard some scathing dissent from Justice Sotomayor, who really highlighted that since the federal executions, the moratorium on federal executions was lifted in 2019 under the Trump administration, there was a ramping up, if you will, of executions in the federal system, so much so that it was multiple times the amount who've been executed within the last decade or so. And I think that's very telling, and it shows the polarization, the way justice follows politics, if you will, and the polarization of politics also within the bench now. You have the conservative bench pushing forward this execution and scathing dissent from the liberal members of the bench. And I think Justice Sotomayor really pointed out that this was a unprecedented sort of situation here where these executions were being put forward. That's going to change under the Biden administration. I know that he's already stated that there is going to be the moratorium back in place for federal executions. And I think 40 members of Congress are pushing President Biden to put that moratorium in place on his first day of office. So I think, 2019, we've seen these executions. That's going to come to a halt.
Well, Katie, let's play devil's advocate here for a second, right? What about the victims? What about the victim's family? And, I read articles where they described these inmates who are being executed as victims. Is that the way that we should be looking at them? Because these are people who went through the criminal justice system. They were convicted of heinous crimes, these murders, and we've had capital punishment around for a long time for a very strong reason. And the idea that, to say, hey, they're the victims now, and that we should really, take a second and say they shouldn't be executed. If you play devil's advocate, if you take that position, what's your response to that? Because there are victims and their victim family members who are happy that these 13 people were killed.
No, it's a fair point, Jesse, and it's hard too much to play devil's advocate because even if you're a convicted person, you still have due process rights. But on the flip side of that, I get it. There were 3 victims with respect to Higgs, and part of the issue with Higgs, though, if we just look at it, is that the individual who actually, I believe, carried out those crimes got a life sentence and he got death. And so there was some level of inequity from the very beginning with that case. But I get it. If those were my family members, I would feel, of course, very distraught, especially when later on history is painting the perpetrator as someone who was victimized. But you can still be both. You can be a person who did bad things and committed crimes, and you also can be victimized by the system. And that's why we have processes in place. And that's why there were moratoriums on death penalties. And to do something like it happened here, where it felt rushed, it felt that there was so much political pressure. I mean, literally rushing to kill someone before somebody else gets into office just has a very distasteful feeling, regardless of what you feel about the death penalty. So I think that is why there's so much public outcry here.
Imran, 30 seconds. Let's switch gears again. The family members, the friends, the supporters of these people that were executed, do they have any legal recourse if they feel that this was an unjust execution or unjust executions?
So, Jesse, unfortunately, I think that there would be little legal recourse to challenge this, after the fact. I believe there would be a certain level of immunity in terms of this executive decision or the federal decision by the federal government to push through these executions. But perhaps there's a lawyer out there who's willing to take on the fight. Perhaps Catherine. I know that she does a lot of civil rights and pursue any possible causes of action that these were unjust executions. I think it would be a very tough fight, just given the fact that it was up to SCOTUS. They put through the decision, but maybe Catherine's going to take on that fight.
I like you're giving Catherine work, and she doesn't. She went on to be on the show just to speak about different stories. She's going to get clients at the end of this. So, all right, we'll take a break because when we come back, we have to focus on a really interesting legal development in the case of Derek Chauvin. We'll be right back.
We're here today because George Floyd is not here. He should be here. He should be alive, but he's not. About 9 days ago, the world watched Floyd utter his very last words, "I can't breathe," as he pled for his life. The world heard Floyd call out for his mama and cried out, "Don't kill me." Just 2 days ago, when I became the lead prosecutor in the murder of Mr. Floyd, I asked for time. To the Floyd family, to our beloved community, and to everyone that is watching, I say, George Floyd mattered. He was loved. His family was important. His life had value. And we will seek justice for him and for you, and we will find it. The very fact that we have filed these charges means that we believe in them. But what I do not believe is that one successful prosecution can rectify the hurt and loss that so many people feel. The solution to that pain will be slow and difficult work of constructing justice and fairness in our society.
That's Attorney General Keith Ellison talking about the George Floyd case. And we have an interesting legal development in really the case of Derek Chauvin. This is the man who's facing murder and manslaughter charges in connection with Floyd's death. He and his wife are facing tax evasion charges in a separate case. And we have just learned that that tax evasion trial is scheduled and has been pushed to June 30th, which means that that is after the conclusion of Chauvin's criminal trial in the killing of George Floyd. So, Katie, I start with you. If this timeline stays that way, I find that very curious. You might have a guy who's either convicted of murdering George Floyd and then has to go on trial for tax charges, or you have a guy who is acquitted of the murder of George Floyd and still has to face this tax trial. What do you think of that?
You know, the first thing I thought when I saw this is, wow, they're really coming down on him. I mean, there are, I'm sure, a lot of tax evasion issues that go on, and not all of them are prosecuted. So there's a reason that they're doing this. And one of those main reasons could be pressure. One other reason for him to try to cut a deal if offered, and probably to make him feel the pressure during the actual criminal trial. It just feels like it's a sense of just trying to come after him, rightly or wrongly. But here's the thing: if he's convicted, right, there's all sorts of civil implications that he's going to face, such that his property could be levied for different judgments. But if he's not convicted, that makes the civil case a lot harder. And here, if he loses on the tax case, the government can come after his property too. So it seems like his personal property is greatly at risk. And of course, obviously, his freedom. So he's got a lot of legal issues to be dealing with.
Yeah, that's one way of looking at it. And Imran, the chances that that schedule stays to be, because I just saw that the prosecution is now asking the court to reconsider, trying Derek Chauvin in March separately from the other officers, the former officers who are being tried in the summer together. Basically, they're saying there's a COVID concern, that if you have this criminal trial in March, it could be a super spreader event. The likelihood that we're really going to see this murder trial before the tax trial.
Yeah, the prosecution has been citing to this COVID threat in papers before the court, and it hasn't received much sympathy yet. But it is, I think, somewhat of a valid point if you think that it's going to be drawing large crowds, protesters, and a lot of interest in and around the courtroom. That could be something in this day and age with the pandemic as a valid risk. But we know that the court has not really been sympathizing with that argument. I know the judge stated that he has a lot of other cases on for trial, and if it's not going to be this one, it's going to be another one. So we know that the court is looking to push this case through. And then you have the tax case, which is now going to be laying in wait, if you will, until after the murder trial. It's really something that I don't want to trivialize it, but it's not a lot of money that is owed in the tax case. Inevitably, I don't know what's going to happen with the murder trial, if it's a conviction or acquittal, but I think that's going to be something that's going to be worked out with the government in terms of the payment. It's a joint, he's joint defendants with his wife. It was joint marital property that they underreported in terms of money, and I think they owe about $37,000 or so in tax money. But it's just on the optics point of view. It's also not good for Derek Chauvin. He's got this case, and now he's also looking like he could be a cheat, allegedly cheating the government out of tax monies. So, we're going to see if this case is going to go forward in March or whether it's going to be adjourned like the co-defendants. But this tax case sort of is like a thorn in Derek Chauvin's heel, if you will. But ultimately, I think it's, as Catherine stated, just added pressure. He's facing this other case, and inevitably, I think it's going to actually be worked out, no matter how the murder trial goes.
Well, I don't know. A good outcome for Derek Chauvin. I mean, his attorneys might be hoping for it. He might be hoping for it. But with these mounting pressure on all these sides, who knows what to expect. Katie, Imran, appreciate you taking the time. Everyone out there, thank you for joining us here on Law and Crime Report. We'll be back tomorrow, 12 p.m. Eastern. See you then.